Hi, this is Misty Garcia and Jabracie Leonard, and this is our pioneer presentation for the life and theories of Jean Piaget and Leonard Vygotsky.
The early life of John Piaget. He was born on August the 9th, 1896 in Switzerland, and he died on September the 16th, 1980 at the age of 84. He was the oldest son of author Piaget, professor of medieval literature at the University of National, and Rebecca Jackson, French. Piaget was a child who developed an interest in biology and the natural world. His early interest in zoology earned him a reputation among those in the field after he had published several articles by the age of 15.
Lev Vygotsky was born on November 17, 1896. He died of tuberculosis on June 11, 1934. He was born in Orsha, the Russian Empire, which is now Belarus, to Jewish parents. His father was a banker, and his mother stayed home with Lev and his 7 siblings, although she was trained to be a teacher. Vygotsky was admitted to Moscow University in 1913 with an interest in social sciences and humanities. He then attended law school at Moscow City People's University. He taught literature and psychology, and then in 1924, he joined the staff at the Institute of Psychology in Moscow.
Piaget's theory of cognitive development. According to Piaget's theory of cognitive development, he described it in 4 different stages: sensomotor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational, and formal operations. Sensomotor stage, it starts from the age of 0 to 2 years old. Children at the sensomotor stage are explorers. They want to see, hear, taste, and touch everything around them. They generally do not appear to be thinking about what they do. No obvious rationale underlies their motives. Object permanence is mastered. For example, if you hide a toy underneath the blanket, they are more than likely the child will remove the blanket and find the toy. Pre-operational stage ranges from the age 2 to 7. During this stage, children begin to engage in symbolic play and learn to manipulate symbols. However, Piaget noted that they do not yet understand concrete logic. For example, if a child is able to use an object to represent it as something else, pretending that a broom is a horse. Concrete operational stage ranges from the age of 7 to 11. This period span is the time of middle school, and it is characterized by the development of logical thought. While kids at this age become more logical about the concrete and specific things, they still struggle with abstract ideas. And for example, reversibility. 5 plus 5 equals x, so therefore x minus 5 equals 5. Formal operation stage is age 11 plus. Cognition reaches its final form by this stage. The person no longer requires concrete objects to make rational judgments. He or she is capable of deductive and hypothetical reasoning. His or her ability for abstract thinking is very similar to an adult. The emerging abstract thought and hypothetical reasoning marks this phase in development. At this point in development, thinking becomes much more sophisticated and advanced. Kids can think about abstract and theoretical concepts and use logic to come up with creative solutions to problems. For example, if you could be a new color, what would you be and why?
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object. but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? Do you think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're both the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than that. Looks bigger.
So first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass?
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here. Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice in it.
It says, if you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break.
I knew that.
And then this one says, Dawn hit a glass with a hammer.
I knew that too.
So what happened to the glass?
It broke.
It broke. Why did it break?
Because the hammer's hard.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Dawn hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened? Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather was soft.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break. And the second one, Dawn hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
It broke.
And why did it break?
Because the rule says if you hit a glass with a feather, it'll break. So if you hit a glass with a feather, it broke.
Vygotsky's theory was based on cultural historical theory. The basis came from language. Vygotsky believed that language develops from social interactions for communication purposes and believed that it was man's greatest tool, communicating with the outside world. He differentiates between three forms of language: social speech from age 2, which is used to talk to others; private speech from age 3, which is talking to oneself; and silent inner speech or private speech from age 7, which is verbal thinking. And in this stage, language and thought come together. For Vygotsky thought that thought and language are initially separate systems from the beginning of life, and they merge at around 3 years of age, and then they become interdependent. Thought becomes verbal, speech becomes representational. He was the first psychologist to document the importance of private speech and consider private speech as the transition point between social and inner speech. According to his theory, children raised in environments that are cognitively and linguistically stimulating start using private speech faster and more often than children with less privileged backgrounds. Children raised in environments with low verbal and social exchanges have delays in private speech development. This relates to his other parts of his theory, the more knowledgeable other, which is someone who has better understanding or ability than the learner, like a teacher, adult peers, or even children. While most often you think of a more knowledgeable other as a teacher or a parent or an older adult, sometimes a child can teach an adult, such as, for an example, a child may be teaching an adult how to play a video game that they've never played before. So just because they're younger doesn't mean that they're not more knowledgeable in a certain area. The zone of proximal development is the biggest part of Vygotsky's theory, and this relates to the difference between what a person can achieve independently and what they can achieve with guidance. The zone of proximal development is the area where the most active guidance should be given. It allows children to develop higher mental functions and encourages cooperative learning with peers. Social interactions contribute to cognitive development. So skills that are too difficult for children to master on their own, but they can be done with guidance and encouragement from a knowledgeable person, is within the zone of proximal development. You don't want the task to be too difficult for the child or too easy.
Lev Vygotsky was a Russian developmental psychologist whose major contributions to the field and education occurred between the early 1920s and mid to late 1930s. While Vygotsky was only able to provide roughly a decade of work, his contributions are ever present in today's classrooms. As a developmental psychologist, Vygotsky focused a great deal on not only the development of children, but the learning processes involved with their development. According to Vygotsky, learning happens because we interact with the environment. Further, he believed that we do not learn because we have developed, rather, we develop because we have learned. In short, learning precedes development. Learning new things enhances our developmental level. However, in order to learn, we must be presented with tasks that are just out of reach of our present abilities. Tasks that are too simple or already within our present abilities do not promote learning. On the other hand, tasks that are too complex become frustrating and no learning occurs. Vygotsky believed that those tasks which are just beyond our present ability exist in what he called the zone of proximal development. The tasks in the zone of proximal development are the things we can almost do ourselves, but need help from others to accomplish. After receiving help from others, we will eventually be able to do them on our own, thus shifting them out of our zone of proximal development. In other words, we have learned something. Here is an example. Little Johnny cannot swim. If he tried to teach himself to swim, he would most likely drown. However, if Johnny enlists the help of a swimming instructor, he will soon be able to learn to swim. In this scenario, swimming would be considered to be within Johnny's zone of proximal development. Why? Because it is a task he cannot accomplish on his own, but he can accomplish with the encouragement and guidance from someone else. Okay, so how does the concept of the zone of proximal development factor into the roles of today's teachers? Simple. The subject matter that teachers are going to teach our students falls within their zone of proximal development. Our students are able to learn the content. They just need guidance and encouragement from a teacher in order to do so. As teachers, we must be conscious of the fact that every student has a different zone of proximal development. In modern educational jargon, this means differentiation. Educators must design lesson plans that cater to the zone of proximal development for each of their students in order to avoid boredom and or frustration in the classroom. The take-home message? Every student learns differently. But, more importantly, every student can learn. They just need the help of a teacher.
The similarities between Piaget and Vygotsky. Like Piaget, Vygotsky agreed that babies are born with certain basic abilities for cognitive development. For example, elementary mental functions, attention, sensation, perception, and memory. Higher mental functions are developed through social interactions.
The differences between Piaget and Vygotsky. Piaget's theory was a logical cognitive development, and Vygotsky's was social cognitive development. Piaget's theory was based upon assimilation and accommodation, while Vygotsky's theory was based on culture and language. And Piaget's theory states that we learn as we develop, and Vygotsky's theory states that we develop as we learn. Piaget said that cognitive development was mostly universal, but Vygotsky's cognitive development theory varies across cultures because students learn from various cultures and languages. Unlike Piaget's theory that children's development must necessarily precede their learning, Vygotsky argued that learning is a necessary and universal aspect of the process of developing culturally organized, specifically human psychological function. In other words, social learning tends to precede development. Vygotsky placed more emphasis on culture affecting and shaping cognitive development, and this contradicts Piaget's view of universal stages and content of development. Vygotsky assumes that cognitive development varies across cultures, whereas Piaget states that cognitive development is mostly universal. Vygotsky places more emphasis on social factors contributing to cognitive development, from social interactions, from guided learning within the zone of proximal development as children and their partners co-construct knowledge. In contrast, Piaget maintains that cognitive development stems largely from independent explorations in which children construct knowledge of their own. So for Vygotsky, the environment in which children grow up will influence how they think and what they think about. He also places more emphasis on the role of language in cognitive development. For Vygotsky, cognitive development results from internalization of language. And Piaget, according to Piaget, language depends on thought for its development. And for Vygotsky, thought and language are initially separate systems from the beginning of life and merge around age 3. So using Piaget's and Vygotsky's theories in teaching, a teacher can use reciprocal teaching, such as summarizing, questioning, clarifying, and predicting, and they teach their students how to use these methods to take control of their own learning. You can also scaffold your instruction within the zone of proximal development, and structure your task to build upon the student's current knowledge and move them further along into guided practice and then into their independent learning. Collaborative learning also helps with the social interactions, helping students develop cognitively among their peers. So both Piaget and Vygotsky would probably agree that students need to be taught in the magic middle, where students are not bored because it's too easy, but they're also not frustrated because it's too difficult. Students should be put in situations where they have to reach to understand, but where they have support from their teachers or their peers. Sometimes the best teacher is another student who has just figured out how to solve the problem and can explain it to a student that may be having difficulty, because this student is probably operating in the learner's zone of proximal development. So as teachers, our goal is to reach students where they need the most support and offer what they need to learn the most. And here are our videos that we used earlier in the slideshow, one for Piaget and one for Vygotsky.
Now we hope that you understand more about the cognitive development between John Piaget and Vygotsky.
The end. Thank you.